Hi everybody, I'm Mike McCrory and this is Would You Make It? So I had these leftover pieces of wood, some walnut, some cherry, some maple, and some sepal, and when put together they will make some very attractive cutting boards. So in this episode I'm going to make a face grain cutting board. A face grain cutting board is probably the least durable because the grain is more open on the top. And they tend to warp or cup more than other types of cutting boards. So to get around that issue, I'm going to fasten some breadboards on the ends of the cutting board. That will help to minimize any warping that can occur. So let's get started. I'll start by ripping up a piece of leftover hardwood flooring. I think this is Brazilian cherry or something like that. And then I have a leftover piece of walnut. It's about 6 inches wide, and I'm just cutting it in half. So I've got two pieces now. And then I'll rip it to be the same width for both pieces. It was pretty easy to cut those pieces and get them ready for glue up. So I've got a piece of Brazilian cherry running down the middle, and that will help to minimize some of the warping and potential cupping. I'm using Titebond 3, which is food safe and waterproof glue, and I'm using lots of it because I want to make sure that this stays glued when it's underwater and being cleaned up. And now I'll clamp it up with even pressure to make sure the board remains flat, and then I'll wipe up the excess glue with a damp rag because it's a lot easier to clean it up now. And I'll unclamp it and take it over to the table saw to trim the ends. And now I'll just trim the ends so that I've got a nice straight edge on each end. And now I'll take this piece of cherry and rip it down the middle. These will be the pieces that are used as the breadboard on the ends of the cutting board. I run it through the jointer and planer just to get it all straight and flat and the same thickness as the rest of the cutting board. This is the second glue up, so we're putting the breadboards on now. To make this type of a cutting board with the breadboards takes an extra day just to allow the glue to set. And I'll clamp it up and then let it sit overnight. Again, it's a lot easier to wipe up the glue now before it hardens, so I'm just wiping everything with a damp rag to clean it up. Now, using my crosscut sled, I will trim up any of the overhanging cherry so that I have a nice straight edge on both sides. And then I'll run it through the drum sander to get everything a nice even thickness. I have a 1/2 inch round nose bit in the router, and I'll use this to cut a groove in each end of the cutting board. This provides a place where you can put your fingers to lift up the cutting board. And I think this is a better option than putting feet on one side of the cutting board because this gives the option to use both sides of the cutting board. I want to round over the corners of the cutting board, so I'm just using a cap and drawing an arc on each corner, and then I'll take it over to the bandsaw. Now I'll just finish that up with a sander to remove any of the sawtooth marks. Now I'm using a 1/4 inch round over bit to round over the edges. Now since this cutting board is less than an inch thick, it's just a little bit less than an inch, I have to be careful that the bearing doesn't go into the groove. So I'm going to completely avoid that area with the round over bit and finish up the rest just by hand sanding it. I'm doing lots of hand sanding, and then prior to applying the finish, I'm going to wet the board to raise the grain, let it dry and sand it, and then do that one more time with more water, more sanding, and then it's ready to apply the oil. I'm using a cutting board oil, and I'm applying a liberal amount. I'm going to let it soak in overnight, and then I will sand it lightly and then apply another coat. So there's the finished product, and I gotta ask, would you make it?